Shana Tova. It is a little odd to not be able to see you all through the stage lights, but some people get less nervous when they can't see the faces, and I'm the exact opposite. I'm so used to looking at your faces; it's very disorienting. Thank you. When I was in rabbinic school, I trained as a hospital chaplain. And part of my training meant that I was on call for emergencies once in a while. And so one night, a Saturday night at 3 in the morning, a call came from a nurse who told me that a Jewish family had lost someone unexpectedly. The rabbi was unable to be there. Could I come? I was only a few months postpartum and I was completely exhausted. So I don't think I stopped to think about why their rabbi couldn't be there at 3 a.m. in the morning. This wasn't New York. This wasn't Los Angeles. This was Cincinnati. So I wasn't really putting two and two together that maybe this was an Orthodox family. So I show up to the hospital and I go to the nurse's station, and this very perky nurse pops up from behind the counter and says, "Oh, I didn't know there were women rabbis. That's so cool." It's like, wow, that's a lot. I said, yes, there are women rabbis. And after we got through that, she led me down the corridor to the family room. And as we passed the room with the glass wall, I saw through the blinds the long skirts and the dark hats. And I realized before I could say anything, all at once and too late, that this was a very Orthodox family. And I didn't have a chance to say a word. We burst through the door, and this very, very upbeat nurse said, "Your rabbi is here." And the family looked up. There was a second of silence and a round of sniffles, and then a giant collective sob. I don't mean like a little crying. I mean like a throw yourself on the casket kind of wail. It was, no one has ever been so unhappy to see me. Never. And I guess I could say that it's not what I expected, but I did expect that. And the nurse looked completely stricken. And I quickly said, "No, I'm not your rabbi. I'm your chaplain." And I meant it. I would never expect this ultra Orthodox family to call me their rabbi, and my job was to assist anyone, regardless of faith, tradition. So I'm your chaplain was an honest description of who and what I was to that family at that time. But the assumptions and the judgments had already been made. And one of the men quickly and with more than a little bit of disdain said, "But you're one of those reform ones, probably from that school." I said, "Yes, but I work for the hospital and I visit patients regardless of denomination." He snapped back, "Well, we don't need you." I didn't want to push any further, but I also wanted to do my job. So I asked, can I offer you my book of Tehillim, my book of Psalms? It is traditional to sit with the body and recite Psalms until burial. And I assumed that since they had been blindsided by this sudden death, they probably didn't have a book of Psalms with them. They looked surprised, as if they didn't expect me to even know the tradition, let alone carry a book of Psalms. So they refused, and I left and walked away down the corridor. Whenever I tell this story, inevitably someone will ask if I was offended by their behavior. So let me just say, I wasn't. I didn't judge them. I can't judge people in the worst moment of their lives when they are in shock. But it was clear that they had a whole set of assumptions about me that made it impossible for them to see me as their chaplain. They were so put off by the idea of a woman as a rabbi that they could not allow themselves to accept whatever comfort or assistance I could have offered. It wasn't the first, nor will it be the last time that people made assumptions about me because of my gender or my title. It happens to all of us. We sum people up based on appearance, on gender, on background, or beliefs. In some ways, it's human and it's even protective. But the trouble begins when we assume that people are just one thing. The troubling part of the interaction was not that an Orthodox family refused the assistance of a Reform rabbi. The troubling part was that they seemed to have made an assumption that as a woman and as a rabbi, I was therefore ignorant about traditional Jewish practice, and that as a woman and a rabbi, I was liberal and probably judgmental about their level of observance. I could have held an equally limiting set of assumptions about them, that the way they were behaving meant that they were completely closed-minded and disdainful of women. But again, we can't make sweeping assumptions about what people believe, especially when they are in the midst of accepting a devastating loss. When we are fearful, though, we cling to these assumptions. But at this time of year, as we begin the process of reflection and change, it's worth acknowledging that the entire enterprise of repentance rests on this one important truth. People are more than one thing. To be a living, breathing human being means to be full of contradictions and possibilities, and that's hard to accept. We want people who hurt us to be bad and the people who love us to be incapable of harm, but people simply do not fit neatly into categories. Part of growing up is being able to see your parents as whole people and accepting that they can be flawed and spectacular all at once. Perhaps because we live in highly charged and deeply polarizing times, we're even more insistent that there be good guys and bad guys. But the process of teshuvah rests on the assumption that human beings are not only varied, we are also capable of transformation and change. We have to assume that about ourselves and about others, and being able to accept this is both emotionally and cognitively challenging. In all my years dealing with teenagers, I can say that what differentiates a young person who is immature from one who is on his or her way to becoming a fully realized adult is the ability to accept and hold two opposing truths at the same time. People can be wonderful and people can be horrible. And sometimes the very same people who are wonderful are horrible. And the same is true of institutions and nations and concepts. And why is it so important that we accept this truth? Because in order to immerse ourselves in the work of teshuvah, in order to both be forgiven and to forgive, we need to believe that we already have within us the capacity to change. If there's any message of these high holy days, it is this: all of us are capable of transformation. As Walt Whitman said, we are all contain multitudes. And while this may be disorienting, it's also hopeful, because it means that it is actually because we are walking contradictions that we are also capable of this transformation. The process of personal transformation is a very high priority to Judaism. We set aside an entire month of Elul for it. And while we care about tikkun olam, repairing the world around us, our tradition implores us to work hard on ourselves. And I would argue that this work on ourselves comes first. Frankly, it's easy to get swept up in the chaos and the pain all around us. The brokenness of the world is real and startling. There are deep political divisions. There's violence and war, threats to Israel, rising anti-Semitism, and the list goes on. It's easy to justify immersing ourselves in trying to fix the many problems that plague us. But if we focus only outward, on taking positions and winning arguments or defending ourselves without doing the inner work, we risk remaking the world in the image of our own pain. There is a great risk in failing to first look inward. Some of us avoid it by burying ourselves in our work or raising a family, or by getting caught up in fighting for a cause. And as a result, we end up behaving in ways that inflicted the very same kind of harm that inspired us in the first place. This is the paradox of pain that goes unexamined and unhealed. We simply end up recreating the scenarios that gave rise to the very things that hurt us. Without healing our own trauma, we risk traumatizing others. But the cycle can be broken. When we return to ourselves and ask, what have I lost? Where have I gone wrong? What do I need to do to ensure that my regret does not calcify into the shame that causes bad behavior? This is not an easy process. None of us wakes up in the morning and says, I cannot wait to roll up my sleeves and look at where I went wrong. And none of us relishes the task of healing from loss. Perhaps that's why our tradition designed this time of forced reckoning. It's not something we do willingly because it's painful. I used to have a professor in rabbinic school who would hand out these very bad copies of Talmudic pages, and we could barely read them. They were impossible. And he would say, suffer like your ancestors did. And suffer we do, because this process requires profound humility. Let's be honest, it's easier to analyze and complain about coworkers or your spouse or your family. It's easier to do that than to look at yourself in the mirror and say, you're no picnic either, sweetheart. It's hard. And looking inward is something we are forced to do. We only do it when we are face to face with the most predictable of human experiences, and that is, of course, loss. Recently, I read this quote by author Elizabeth Gilbert, and it goes like this: loss plus liberation equals transformation. Let me say that again. Loss plus liberation equals transformation. When I heard it, I immediately thought of the late summer of 2021, when that formula became a reality for me. It started with a simple and devastating text from my then husband, who was on the other side of the world. It read, I'm sorry to tell you, I am never coming back. Plain and simple. A text ending a 6-year relationship. That was it. Were there warning signs? Not really. Were there signs that things were wrong? Certainly, lots of signs that things were not right. But there was no justification for ending a marriage without any conversation, without counseling, or even a major fight with a text. In the aftermath of that moment, there was a revelation that the relationship was built on a foundation of lies. But none of that mitigates the shock of seeing those words, I am never coming back. It literally and figuratively knocked the wind out of me. I've long analyzed the penultimate moments of the relationship, turning the facts over in my mind, looking for clues and signs that it was dying and that then it was dead. And with the help of good friends and a good therapist, I eventually understood that my own feelings of shame and inadequacies were the reasons I had allowed myself to be lured into a relationship with such a broken person in the first place. But in the immediate aftermath of this loss, the most surprising thing was not the lies I uncovered. It was the relief I felt. It was feeling I could not quite name until I read Elizabeth Gilbert's formula, loss plus liberation equals transformation. Because yes, there were tears. And yes, I thought about what others would think and how they might judge me. But there was also something else, something I was almost ashamed to admit. After receiving that text, after the shock lifted, after my friends who came and left the house, and after the phone stopped ringing with family, the house was quiet, and I sat on the couch, and I felt liberated. It was as if a wave had washed everything away and left me with a blank canvas and a box of paints. I was angry, embarrassed, terrified, but I was free. Loss plus liberation equals transformation. And that night I dreamt of the tide going out, exposing a long, windswept beach, like the beaches of my youth on Cape Cod, where the water recedes, leaving a wide open expanse of rippled sand, scattered with tide pools, each one teeming with life, crabs and clams, shells and rocks. That was my life at the moment, empty, but open and full of possibility. The loss was profound, but so was the liberation and the transformation. And because I was willing to examine my role in that relationship and its demise, I could walk the length of that beach and allow myself to be transformed by the loss. I know that not every loss is freeing, but every loss opens up space. Lose a job, and suddenly you have room to reimagine your working life. Lose a relationship, and you are free from its constraints. Loss is always painful, and yes, we have to grieve what we lost, but loss also creates possibility. And just as loss is the cost of living life, reinventing ourselves in its aftermath is the work of being human. Loss plus liberation equals transformation. Our tradition also offers examples of this, like Jacob and Esau, two brothers pitted against each other from the beginning by a mother who favored one over the other. The story of this family truly puts the fun back in dysfunctional. A mother who openly favored one twin, Jacob, over the other, and a tradition that bestows the birthright to the child who happens to be born first, Esau. But after Rebekah helps Jacob trick his father into giving him the birthright that should have belonged to Esau, Jacob is forced to flee because in a fit of rage, Esau vows to kill his brother. So they part, enemies, and are estranged for decades. There is so much loss in this story. Not only does Esau lose what was rightfully his, but both brothers lose their family when Jacob has to flee. But here's the most remarkable thing that happens. In the aftermath of the family's implosion, the two brothers build lives. They go on to build lives, and they're successful. They acquire wealth. They have multiple wives and children. And because they are nomadic, they eventually end up on paths that will cross. Jacob's men warn him that he will very soon encounter Esau. And on the night before he is set to see his brother after decades of estrangement, he lies down to sleep and wrestles with an angel, his conscience. And this angel tries to kill him, as shame does. In my mind, this battle is really about Jacob wrestling with his demons. And when he faces them, he awakens as a different person, permanently injured, but with a new name, our name, Israel. It's a metaphor for the kind of struggle that we all go through. And the next day, Jacob sees his brother, and he too has been transformed. Esau is wealthy and content. Jacob, now Israel, throws himself at his brother's feet, begging for forgiveness, but Esau doesn't hesitate. He embraces his brother without anger. The dysfunction of their childhood is healed because out of loss, each was liberated to go on and live lives. And in those years, both were transformed. They embrace, they forgive each other, and they begin a new chapter in their lives. Transformation is a central work of this season, and it's not because our tradition wants us only to focus on ourselves. It's because our tradition understands that the most effective human beings are those who have found a way to be transformed by loss. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur ask that we turn inward and ask ourselves, what is broken? What must be mended? How can I write a new chapter to my story? This is cyclical work. It's never ending, but it's not because we're going backwards. It's more like a circular staircase. Each time we return to ourselves, either because we are brave enough to look inward or because loss forces us to, we inch closer to a more authentic self. It's tempting to focus on the problems that surround us. Working on ourselves is tedious and painful, but more than just a compassionate world rests on the shoulders of souls who have been strengthened and transformed by loss. A better world depends on our willingness to become better people. And by better, I mean more compassionate and more self-aware. The Hasidic master, Rabbi Zusia, once said that when his life was over, he would stand before the Almighty God, and God would ask him, God would not ask him, Zusia, why were you not as great as Moses? And why were you not as courageous as Abraham? God would ask him, why were you not Zusia? Why were you not fully yourself? It may sound trite, but be yourself. The truth, but in truth, it is the hardest and most important work of all. It is a journey that is never finished, but in it lies the one thing that gives me the greatest amount of hope. our God-given ability to create and recreate ourselves, to become, as Charles Dickens wrote, the heroes of our own lives. Rosh Hashanah is the birthday of the world, but Judaism also teaches that each of us is a world, a universe unto ourselves. On this day, we can recreate ourselves anew. We can come to know ourselves with exquisite precision through the work of teshuvah, so that we can stand before God and say, I was not Moses, I was not Abraham, I was Uzziah. I did the work of teshuvah, and I have become year by year more truly myself, and that is more than enough. Shana Tova.